Well, surprise, I'm going to talk about the drought. Uh, yeah. So what is drought? Well, it's basically two parts. One is below normal precipitation for some extended period of time, plus the impacts based on things like crops and water shortages and river navigation and things like that. So it's both the impacts and the shortage of rainfall. It's not a distinct event, so that makes it really hard to define. So it's not like a snowstorm. We have a beginning and ending. It kind of sneaks up on you and then slowly sneaks away from you. It also means different things to different people. So if you're a farmer, you're talking about agricultural drought, and that's really during the growing season. And it's basically a lack of soil moisture. So that's kind of what we dealt with for most of this summer, was a classic agricultural drought. But we also have some problems in terms of hydrologic drought with the rivers and streams and lakes and groundwater resources of the state. And those tend to be a little longer, spanning maybe 6 to 12 months, and they tend to develop a little slower and recover a little slower as well. So here's the precipitation month by month as a departure from normal. So we can see back in January of this year we were dry, and basically kind of dry all the way through April. And then the bottom fell out of the rain gauge, and we went from kind of dry to full-blown drought in that May, June, July time frame. We've covered a little bit in the more recent months, but kind of the core period of the drought was that May, June, July time period. So very dry. And if you look at the stats for January through July, that period was the third driest on record, and it's right up there with the bad boys of 1936 and 34 and 1988. So truly a historic drought in that particular time period. Now, if we look at the results of that, it was pretty grim around the state. Corn, soybeans, pasture, soil moisture is all a really rough shape as we got towards the end of the growing season, and that had significant impacts on the ag economy of the state. The other part of the story is we had really hot weather this summer. You know, we're not like Oklahoma. We don't see that much 100-degree weather. Here in Champaign-Urbana, we had 10 days that had a big impact on stressing the corn especially. And here's some shots of some corn in a farm pond. So not only was impacting the corn, this is about chest high in July when it should be about that high, but also was putting stress on the water resources at the farm levels as far as livestock goes. So by get into August time frame, we were actually in full-blown drought in all parts of the state. Probably the wettest part of the state, ironically, was Cook County, which they don't grow much corn up there, but that's kind of the way it goes, I guess. If you look at the national map, this was part of a very large-scale drought. I haven't seen anything like this since really the 1988 drought, where it was all the Midwest and much of the West as well was in some stage of fairly significant drought. So it was pretty widespread. You get into the fall, I was expecting a slow recovery, and lo and behold, we had the remains of Hurricane Isaac move up in Illinois. Now, it wasn't obviously a hurricane at this point in time. It was more like just a low-pressure system with lots of rainfall, but that's just what the doctor ordered in terms of recovery of the soil moisture. So we had some very nice, slow, steady rains that really recharged the soil moisture at this point in time. And in fact, as far as the statewide numbers, we were getting numbers on the order of 3 to 6 inches, the areas in blue on this map here, and much of the southern two-thirds of the state. North of I-80, they kind of missed out on this particular rainfall event. But that was kind of the turning point for much of the state in terms of soil moisture. Right now, we're down about 10 inches statewide on below normal, but we've got some spots that are a little better shape. East of St. Louis, it's close to normal, but we've got some bad spots in northern and southern Illinois, and western Illinois is still 10 to 14 inches below normal. Here's the national map as it stands right now. The core of the drought has shifted westward, so it's really more kind of a high plains drought at this point in time. And you'll notice that covers most of the Missouri River Basin. I'll talk more about that in a second. I was really hoping November was going to be wet and we could continue this recovery, but that's not been the case. It's actually been very dry. Soil moisture is recovered, but the subsoil moisture in the streams, lakes, and rivers and wells are still recovering at this point. So they haven't responded nearly as nicely as the soil moisture. So here's Mississippi River at the gauge at Chester, showing the levels from about 2 years ago where it was flood stage, and now it's down to about 0 on the gauge. The forecast is for it to drop to -2 on that particular gauge by mid-December. So there's lots of consternation about the impacts on barge traffic, which is the most cost-effective way of moving grain down to the Gulf and other